So the title of my study is Text-Based Glossary Generation by ChatGPT for Foreign Language Learners. And this comes as a part of my PhD, which addresses very generally text adaptation or abridgment, targeting different audiences, such as children, people with learning disabilities, and also foreign language learners. So I will present a quick relevant background, focusing on extensive reading and glosses. Then I will present the associated corpus, which consists of texts that contain glosses or explanations of some vocabulary items. Then I will talk about the analysis of the glosses, both qualitative and quantitative. And then I will move on to the experiment with glossary generation by ChatGPT in 3 different prompting scenarios: 0 shot, 1 shot, and chain of thought. I will explain this in more detail in a minute, and I will wrap up with conclusions and future work. So extensive reading is just the basic idea of learning a foreign language through reading large amounts of text. And it is very closely related with the idea of unintentional acquisition, or not trying explicitly to memorize, let's say, words or vocabulary, but just reading, possibly for pleasure. And also, as learners read large amounts of text, they come across the words or expressions as they appear in a natural, unchanged context, which research shows is a better way of acquiring vocabulary than, let's say, reading of vocabulary lists or maybe flashcards, including digital ones. And there is a set of books that are especially conceived for the purpose of extensive reading by foreign language learners, and these are the so-called graded readers, and they include, let's say, series like Oxford Bookworms and Penguin Readers. They are typically organized by proficiency level, and the proficiency level is defined as a number of head words or vocabulary knowledge that the reader needs to possess before reading the book. However, this pleasant and provenly motivating practice has some limitations. For instance, there is a need to read a large number of texts if one is to rely on them for vocabulary acquisition. Research shows that a book from a certain level contains around 80% of the vocabulary families that are meant to be acquired for this level. So the more books one reads, the better. Also, progress may be a little slow. For instance, research shows that for 1 hour of extensive reading, a learner may learn around 3 words, and this has been shown by experiments, including pre-tests and post-tests. And also importantly, if one is to rely on a single context or a limited number of contexts for learning the meaning of words, then it is easy to make mistakes and get wrong inferences about what a word means and how it can be used. And the solutions to these problems can include teacher involvement. If a teacher assigns the books to be read, then they will be more aware of the student's level and what book would be suitable for it. And also they would typically offer further discussions, exercises, and in this way, among other things, reuse the same vocabulary that has been encountered in the book and thus reaffirm its acquisition. Very related to this is just the general in-class environment. There has been documented use of the technique of extensive reading in Malaysia and some East African countries, where students demonstrated very high levels of interest in the stories being addressed, and high motivation and sense of community through working in a classroom setting. And also, something that does not exclude the other points is the addition of intentional acquisition in the process of unintentional acquisition that reading is when one just reads independently. So I will specifically talk about glosses, or this is when words or expressions are presented along with additional information about their meaning or use, such as typically definitions or translations into another language, or, where relevant, illustrations. Glosses are addressed by the field of lexicography, which also deals with the composition of dictionaries and related research. Glosses can appear in a number of formats, the most common ones being glossaries at the end of a book or end of a chapter, for instance, and footnotes that appear on every page. And there are also other methods that we will encounter, such as notes in the margin, or text being underlined or written in a different language, in a different color, let's say, or font. Some decisions that need to be made for glosses when they appear in a text include how many words and expressions there should be. In the case of graded readers, for instance, typically only 95% of the words that appear in a book are part of the proficiency level in question. So this makes it easy to make the decision to include the rest of them, the other 5%, in a glossary, for instance. Also, there is the question of which words or expressions to include. Would that be the most complex ones that would help the reader understand the text in question, or the most useful ones that the learner needs to know outside the framework of this text? Sometimes cultural information may be involved as a vocabulary item, as of course the process of language acquisition is intertwined with the process of understanding the related culture. Here's some examples of glosses included in texts meant for foreign language learners or otherwise simplified texts. I try to put some Italian, so there's an example of a glossary after a text, certain words being marked in another color, illustrations when suitable for some nouns, and footnotes at the end of the page, which is something common to many kinds of text, not only graded readers and not only text for foreign language learners. I will move on to the corpus that we assembled for this particular study. It involves 10 texts that are meant for, either explicitly meant for language learners or otherwise simplified. And they're all adaptations of works commonly used in academic curricula and especially appreciated by younger learners. You can see some examples here. There are different languages involved, and it is not always that the original language in which the book is written in is the language in which it appears in the corpus. And in particular, there are 4 languages that are involved in this 10-book corpus: English, Spanish, Italian, and French. And all of them contain glosses in one way or another. This is the actual corpus, statistics about the corpus. The most represented series are Oxford Bookworms and the Spanish one, Calafate. So the glosses in the text in this corpus were analyzed both qualitatively and quantitatively. The qualitative analysis consisted of a description of the glosses in the text, their placement, where they appear, and their content, what exactly is included, for instance, the definition, translation, and so on. And the quantitative ones, here it's mainly statistical tools that were utilized. So the number of glosses or percentage of glosses in the text as a whole, the parts of speech that the glosses are pertain to, the density or how many times a certain gloss appears in the whole text, and finally the frequency ranks. This analysis was based on data sets of frequency lists in the 4 languages in which there are texts in the corpus. And these frequency lists were all taken from the open subtitles corpus, which is available through Wikipedia, Corpora, and it is highly parallel. It tends to include the same text as source text, so it makes the analysis comparable across languages. And here are the results of the qualitative analysis. So the placement, mostly glossaries at the end of the book, in 3 cases footnotes, and in 3 cases definitions appearing in the margin of the text. And the content of the glosses consisted in definitions in 4 cases, items used in a sentence, an example use in 3 of the texts, translations in 1 of the texts, and illustrations between 1 and 4 illustrations where suitable were also included in 3 of the texts, along with another type of content. And the quantitative results, a couple of observations here. There was one book that was a clear outlier in that it contained really a very high number of glosses, 345, compared to at least the 6 or 7 times smaller numbers in the other texts. And in terms of the parts of speech, always the number of nouns was higher, typically followed by verbs, sometimes by adjectives. And half of the text contains cultural items, which were defined as information that carries significant information in terms of the culture, geography, or history of the original text, such as Prince Charming or the River Thames. Also, it can be noted that in the English texts, the glosses tend to include more common words. That is to say, the frequency rank is a smaller number. The items rank more highly in the frequency list. And this is, by the way, not due to the text being of higher proficiency levels. Actually, one of the English texts was level C2, and still it had much higher average rank than texts in other languages. No significant differences were noted by language. Of course, it is a small corpus, but let's say there were no tendencies linked to the way the parts of speech were separated. And finally, there were cases of polysemy, or when that caused problems when a word, something very common in English, when a word can be written in the same way, 2 words can be written in the exact same way, but have completely different meanings, such as will, which in the frequency list would appear only once, but if it appeared as a noun in the glosses, there was no way to take this into consideration, as the frequency list only consists of words out of context. Then the experiment of glossary generation by ChatGPT in its GPT 4.0 version. There were 2 scenarios: 0 shot, where the model was just asked to create a glossary based on a text, and 1 shot, where the model was asked to provide a glossary based on a text, but also given an example of output, an example of a text that has a glossary, so it can serve as a model for it. The source text was the first chapter of Alice in Wonderland. This was a size of text that ChatGPT feels comfortable with, and that could easily be analyzed both qualitatively and quantitatively. And it also included professional translations into Bulgarian and Japanese in order to test a multilingual setting that involves languages of different resourcefulness, and to what extent one can overcome the barrier of, let's say, there not being enough source texts in a particular language. So this text first, it's the first chapter of Alice in Wonderland. Its proficiency level was estimated using available tools, Rote Grammar, Catalan, and Kudo, that themselves use different methods to evaluate the level. The first one, Rote Grammar, is more length-based, like readability features, while Catalan is neural-based, neural network. And the level was estimated as being B1. Two tools estimated it as B1, and the third one is the very uppermost level of A2. Then a secondary text, as said, was used in the one-shot setting, provided as an example. The best candidate in the corpus was the picture of Dorian Gray in English. Once again, English was used even in the other languages in order to check if this can help get resources for languages for which there aren't enough resources. And then the associated glossary was also given to the model. And then the last experiment was chain of thought, that is to say, additional prompting after output is given. And in this case, after the model provided a glossary, it was asked to improve on it based on observations that were gained from analyzing the corpus of texts that have glosses. This was the actual prompt used. Please generate a glossary for the following text. And in the one-shot scenario, there was also the secondary text and its glossary. And here are the results of the automatically generated glosses. ChatGPT tended to give a round number of items, such as 20 or 50. It mostly gave definitions, although it was not told what kind of glosses to provide. And non-English text was often translated into English, such as in the zero-shot Bulgarian text and the two Japanese texts. Also, there was always more information in the zero-shot scenario. The model tended to overly generate, such as examples of use, sometimes translations of the examples of use, even in English, apart from them being in the original language. And the average density is pretty stable, which is normal for a limited size of the text that it was, just a chapter. The part of speech tags were similar to the baseline, to those found in the corpus. And generally, there were almost no items tightly linked to the culture of the text. So then a decision was made which scenario is better between the zero-shot and one-shot. And in all three cases, the one-shot was selected as better because of being closer to the baseline, such as higher density, a cultural item, smaller number of words. The original zero-shot Bulgarian glossary included 50 words, which is really higher for such a small amount of text. And the Japanese two versions were actually quite similar, but once again, the one-shot was a bit closer to the characteristics in the original corpus. And finally, as mentioned, the chain of thought experiment was conducted with the one-shot English output, as chosen to be the better English glossary, in which the model was asked to remove the parts of speech, but retain them only where there is polysemy involved, which was the case in most of the professional glosses. Also, add at least one or two expressions, as there were no expressions originally, only single words, and to provide an image to illustrate an item of its choice. And it was asked to not change anything else. And this was the final result. It's a very sympathetic looking glossary. Indeed, it responded to most of the points of the prompt. There was an expression added, burning with curiosity. There was an image generated, a rabbit hole, and parts of speech were indeed removed. Unfortunately, they were even removed when there was polysemy, which is really a shame because there was an exact textbook case of polysemy, the word bank, but the model did not take this into consideration and leaves the part of speech. Okay, so based on this research, we can conclude that ChatGPT can perform very well at offering glossaries based on learner-friendly text, in particular better in a one-shot than zero-shot setting. And further prompting improves the output further. Also, lower resource languages can benefit from the practice by the model taking in only English text, but returning text in other, including low resource languages. The corpus should be increased in order for generalizations to be possible, such as any differences based on the language at hand or the proficiency level at hand. At this point, this was not taken into consideration due to the small number of words involved. And finally, ideally, in order to help learners, the text itself should be adapted, ideally by ChatGPT or an associated AI tool before it is provided with the glossary. Because right now, originally, learner-friendly text was selected, but this may not always be available. Okay, this is all. Thank you very much.